So, like I mentioned before, things aren't turning well for MJ because, I mean, at first we think that things are going well for her because, I mean, how successful she is as an actress. She gets terrible reviews from critics, and she eventually loses her job, and she kind of feels embarrassed to tell Peter about like her losing her job, which I can find a little bit understandable.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter, at most points, fails to realize that MJ is having her own problems while things in his life are turning out better for him. They don't really have enough time to like settle their issues, mostly due to his activities as Spider-Man. And when we get to the crane rescue scene with Gwen Stacy, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, for the most part, I think her performance for the most part is pretty good. And I do like how like the scene is like played out with the crane going out of control, and then Spider-Man has to save Gwen. And that's when we get to the introduction of Eddie Brock, played by Topher Grace. And since then, I've seen nothing but a lot of people bitching and moaning over a casting choice. And I've seen far worse casting choice for a supervillain than this. If I had to make a list for that, I mean, for worst casting choices for comic book films, then I would probably be here all day, so we don't have the time. Uh, when it comes to Topher Grace as Eddie Brock slash Venom, for one thing, there's not enough screen time dedicated to this character, mostly because he was never supposed to be here in this film in the first place, and Raimi threw him in there because Sony demanded it. And when he eventually turns into Venom, it's it's a huge letdown, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree for the most part that it was not cool. I think of Sony to basically just include a villain in a film where it wasn't even designed for him in the first place. I don't mean to take any jabs, of course, but I just think that if you're going to bring in a villain, you should make a script designed specifically for them. But as far as Eddie Brock and Venom being in this film, despite the fact that it was not meant for them, I personally thought that even though they weren't supposed to be there, they still did a relatively good job of like trying to include him because as far as looks go, the most difference between him and Eddie Brock, if you ask me, is normally just having him be a little more skinny than Brock's usual physique is in the comics and most cartoons.
Because, I mean, he's mostly just more buffed up.
And they have made references to Eddie in the other films, so it does make a little bit of sense for him to be there, but not too much if the script is not designed for him to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
And I get it, it was a mistake back then, and I hope they don't make it again. I'm just
Yeah,
hoping.
but the point to have him in this film was mostly because Sam, when he was forced to include him in the film, he wanted Eddie Brock to become more of a dark doppelganger to Peter, which is basically what Brock is in this film.
Yes, he's basically the opposite of everything that Peter is, really. Where Peter's like, quiet, reserved, and polite. Eddie's like got a better bit of clothes. He's like more out there. He just makes a move on people and just tries his best to like bring pizzazz, so to speak.
And I mean, after we get like the introduction of Eddie and of course Gwen, then when we get to the Daily Bugle with the scene with Jameson being reminded to take his pills, I remember back in '07 when I was 9 years old. That has always made me laugh my ass off.
Yeah, I mean, really, he goes straight for the pills. She buzzes, and every time that happens, the desk vibrates and he jumps. And she goes, "Not that one, not that one." And then he points at the next one. She nods like he's got it right and does it again, saying, "Remember to drink plenty of water."
And spills the pills everywhere.
It's hilarious!
It definitely is. It definitely is. It definitely is.
No matter how good or bad the movie is, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is always a win.
It's perfection.
Well, he is as the character, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's just hilarious.
Yeah. And when we get to the Stanley's cameo, I mean, when we see like Spider-Man is about to receive the key to the city because of him saving Gwen Stacy.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
May I point out that it's been nearly 3 years since Stan Lee passed, and I still miss the shit out of that guy.
Yes, I miss him quite a lot too.
So when we get to the celebration scene with Spider-Man about to receive the key to the city, I like how, like the band plays the Spider-Man theme, which I do think is a nice touch. So when he swings in and he hangs upside down, the crowd for some reason wants Gwen Stacy to kiss Spider-Man. And MJ is in the audience as well as Harry, and Peter is okay with letting Gwen kiss him, and I'm just like, really? Your girlfriend is in the audience, and you're doing the same upside down kiss from the first film. That was like your guy's kiss, and I'm just like, wow, wow, this is like, are you an idiot, Peter? Because I'm just like, for years, even to this day, that still bothers me. And of course, MJ seeing that is like furious and heartbroken.
Of course.
After that happens, we get that one brief fight with Spider-Man and Sandman. And you do mention this is like one of the few times where he actually gets to be a little bit quippy.
Well, to a degree, I don't exactly call that as much of like a quip or a joke as much as just an official statement. He basically lands in the truck as Sandman's packing up loot, and he goes, I guess you haven't heard. I'm the sheriff around these parts. Now, I can understand how, to a degree, that might be considered a joke, but to me, that's both just kind of an old classic line and meant to be sort of like an official statement, you know, that because he doesn't know who Spider-Man is or anything like that. He's never seen him before, so he's trying to let him know that he's the guy who usually stops guys like him.
Yeah, and Spider-Man is unaware of his abilities, and in a way gets his ass handed to him.
Yeah, I mean, it always kind of starts that way with new villains.
I always love the line after he takes his mask off, and he's like, where do all these guys come from?
Yeah, and then he just starts getting a bunch of sand out of his boot. I mean, it's hilarious.
Yeah, then we get to Peter in the Fred's restaurant, and he is accompanied by Fancy French Maitre D, played by none other than Bruce Campbell, and I say none other than Groovy. Because this is easily his best appearances in the trilogy, and the way he describes his name is always so hilarious. Oh yeah, they both work too,
Parker.
That is what I said. Parker.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
that's just perfect in my eyes.
But it's like hilarious for me that one, he's not able to get the name right, and the only thing that Peter really knows how to say in French is "oui."
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, I like you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, well, the reason that he picked that restaurant is so he can propose to MJ, and of course it doesn't go well, and mostly due to Gwen also being there at the same time, which is a little bit convenient for the plot, honestly. And most of the time, I've always thought Gwen's role within the film mostly is just pointless. I mean, she's mostly there to cause friction between Peter and MJ, in a way, and Gwen, in a way, I mean, we know that, we as the audience know that Gwen clearly has the hots for Peter, and he's not completely oblivious to her affection, because, I mean, it's played out pretty much in the opening of the film, but, of course, I mean, he's completely faithful to MJ, for the most part.
And at the same time, some people, Brevin included, of course, do say that her role is kind of pointless, and to a degree, I agree with them, but I did like the idea of being able to see what Gwen Stacy would kind of be like in this respective version of the character, and at the same time, you know, it's just nice to know that they're kind of staying true to the comics, trying to bring in like a character that Peter worked a lot with in his past before actually getting together with MJ. But the fact they bring her in now, I think, really kind
It's
of
just
makes it
kind
interesting.
of, yeah, it's just kind of a bit pointless in my opinion. Even though I do like Bryce Dallas Howard as the character, I do like Emma Stone a little bit better in the Amazing Spider-Man film, which we'll get to later once we review those films.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. But it was interesting to have her be part of the cast, and it makes sense that you know, to a degree for me, that we would bring her in now, mostly because, it's like when you're in a relationship with someone and you basically, like, are faithful as heck to that partner, but then you meet, like, a possible ex girlfriend, possible crush, or just a girl you work with in a lab, any one
Yeah,
of those things. It's meant to, I think,
cause some friction. Yeah,
yes, but also I think maybe kind of a little bit go towards real life problems or real life situations.
yeah. In a way, I can see your point.
Yeah.
Then when we get to the scene with Peter and Aunt May at the police station with Captain Stacy, who reveals that Flint Marco Sandman was actually Uncle Ben's killer. This was like a one uh, subplot which has always bothered me for years, and I honestly don't know why the filmmakers thought this idea was absolutely necessary, because we already think that Flint Marco's motivations were always like clear. I mean, turning to a life of crime to help his daughter was enough for me. But having him being the killer of Uncle Ben, I just was never really a fan of that idea.
Yeah, I I also I think when I was a kid in the theaters and I saw that the first time, I honestly didn't know what to think. I mean, it was confusing for me, but for me, looking back on it now, it's still a little bit of a heartache. The fact that he's Uncle Ben's killer to me kind of adds a little unknown element to his character, like you said before, because like you said, we thought that we knew his intentions the whole time, but this kind of changes the equation, gives us like a little bit of a question about who is this guy, what's his real intentions, why is he doing all this,
Yeah, yeah. In a way, I can understand that, and now because Peter knows this, I mean, he is out for revenge and wants to find Flint and possibly kill him. And he's clear that he's not thinking straight. And even when MJ comes in to like check in with Peter, he naturally just blows her off. And this finally gets to the. When we get to the halfway point of the film, the symbiote finally bonds itself to Peter, and when we first see Spider-Man in his black suit, the theme that we get for that, I do like that theme. I do think it's a pretty good theme, and it starts off again, like I said, one of my favorite storylines from the comics, the Alien Costume Saga. So I like how in the comic it was a slow process of the symbiote slowly corrupting Peter. That was much well explored in the comic, as well as the 90s cartoon, which covers Peter's experiences with the symbiote, as well as Eddie Brock encountering the symbiote and eventually becoming Venom.
Yeah, they definitely, when it comes to paying homage to where it came from, is quite honorable in that regard, I'd say. A nice touch to the film. But one thing is that, like, I think that the symbiote didn't, like, attack Peter sooner. One, because it got into his apartment after it got out of that meteorite earlier on in the movie and went onto his bike. Then after that, Peter had just had a pretty bad time at the police station, feeling conflicted about what he should do. Although he did kind of seem to be taking it rather well, in my opinion, more than I think MJ was worried about. But at the same time, he maybe wanted to blow off some steam. That's why he put the suit on and was ready to go, but then he fell asleep. And since he was having nightmares, the symbiote kind of started to bond with it and start feeding off of it. And it made it stronger with him. So after that, we get the next shot, like Brevin said, with a good score by Christopher Young. I still like Danny Elfman's scene better, but I really think he did a nice job with that, and it's very, it's like exciting, really, what he ends up doing. I mean, first he feels good, then he just starts jumping off a building, cheering his head off. And just,
Yeah, that I do
just,
like.
they,
And so after that, I mean, I like how they give Dr. Connors a bit more an important role in the story, mostly due to him like examining the symbiote for Peter and telling him that this thing needs to bond to a host in order to survive, and warns what this thing is capable of. And I like how they give him an important role, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, they were setting him up to eventually become the Lizard in further sequels, which sadly never happened.
I really enjoyed the fact that, like Brevin said, that he got more screen time, and I think they hinted at the possibility of that happening with a few Easter eggs that they kind of put in Connor's office or just the screen time in general. And I really enjoyed the fact that he had a larger role to play this time.
Yeah, because they eventually wanted, I mean, for one of the many drafts in Spider-Man 4, which we'll get to at the end of the video, Connors would eventually transform into the Lizard, but we sadly never got there, and it's kind of a letdown, honestly.
Peter just goes straight back to his apartment, and he gets a notification from the police radio saying that there's a bank robbery, and he knows it's Marco, so he goes to suit up.
At first, he tries to. I mean, he was about to pick his regular costume, but instead chooses the black suit. And I do like the fight. Right before he goes off into the subway to fight Sandman, that Eddie bumps into him, tries to take a few shots, and Spidey. I mean, he smashes his camera and being like, "See ya, chump."
Yeah, I mean, really. And it's pretty interesting that right before that, as soon as Peter puts the black suit on, it's like the whole area in New York that he's in just starts to naturally become darker. You know? It's just...
which kind of is what they were mostly going for the film. And I like how the fight scene between Black Suit Spider-Man and Sandman is pretty well executed and pretty well shot.
Yeah, I can definitely agree on that. It doesn't have as much, I think, as the last train fight we got with Doc Ock, of course.
No, of course not.
But it is a nice representation of an environment where you can pretty much have these two extremely powerful characters in like a room together and basically assess their strengths, weaknesses, and learn how to exploit them.
Yeah, and in this case, I mean, when he knocks Sandman into a puddle of water, he realizes that's his weakness, and he opens up a pipe, and it reduces Sandman to mud, and Spider-Man thinks he has killed him.
Yeah, so he's like good riddance, because I gotta say, this fight, it was brutal. I mean, he wasn't out there to arrest him or do his usual stick. He was out for revenge. He wanted to make him pay big time. He just went off aggressive.
Oh, yeah. And this eventually leads to the beginning of Emo Peter.
Yeah.
And we all know how annoying and sometimes hilarious and sometimes bad how Emo Peter can be. And he has its moments. I will say that. He does have its moments. And there are some moments where he can be a bit funny in some scenes, which we'll get to in a second. So, so the scenes with Emo Peter, I mean, there are some scenes that I do like, and there are some scenes in particular which I don't like at all, which I'll get to in a minute.
Okay.
So MJ, she gets a new job at a jazz club. She thinks about calling Peter, but instead calls Harry. She goes over to his penthouse, and it leads to a silly dance scene, which I've always had problems with. And they connect for a while, and then they eventually kiss, and this causes her to regret it and leave. And this eventually causes Harry's amnesia to correct itself and have his memories return. And this is also like kind of like helped out by a hallucination of his father. And speaking of that, I wish there was a little bit more hallucinations with Norman trying to like motivate Harry into like seeking revenge against Spider-Man. And if they had added a little bit more of that, I think it would have been more interesting how they continued to handle Harry's story arc.
Yeah, I think perhaps to a degree that would have worked, but personally, I think we've also gotten like a lot of screen time regarding Norman throughout the vast majority of this trilogy. And while I think maybe it could stabilize the story arc just a little,
Yeah.
at the same time, I think at this point perhaps we've like, beat around the bush with him a lot. So it makes sense to not give him too much, but enough for Harry to remember him and regain his persona. At the same time, there's like a lot of good stuff that comes with it when all this happens. Right before, for example, that scene happens, Peter's trying to call in MJ after Mr. Dickovich, where he like has a conversation.
Leave me alone.
Give me rent.
You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door!
Yeah, and that's like when, I mean, Peter begins to like realize the certain changes that the symbiote is doing to him. And well, in particular, I mean, not only does it like change his hair color, but also like increases like his aggression and everything. And Peter is finding it difficult for him to detach himself from the symbiote because I mean he's feeling like completely like drawn to it. I mean he keeps going back to it. And there's like a bit more that's a bit more explored in the editor's cut. Which I do recommend checking out, by the way.
Yes, it is good. I do agree. But anyway, after that, Peter takes the suit off and things start to, brighten up again from the lighting to some of his hair color turning back to its somewhat dark brown. And then he talks to Mr. Dickovich and he apologizes for the door and Mr. Dickovich actually says that, it's okay, but if you want to talk, we could get some pizza sometime, as friends, of course. And he goes, yeah, I like that. And to me, it's just really good, in my opinion, that they decided to give Mr. Dickovich a bit more of a heart in this film, because in the other ones, he's always like, rent, where's my money?
Yeah, which kind of made him one of the best supporting characters in Spider-Man too, because he was just so hilarious.
Yes, but it's also I think nice to know that deep down he actually has a heart. It's very nice. Thought it was a good moment.
Yeah. So after like Harry regains his memory and he forces MJ to break up with Peter, how that scene is executed, I have always hated it. And for one thing, there's a million ways out of this. All MJ had to do was tell Peter that Harry has regained his memories and has threatened to kill him unless she broke up with him. But instead, she just goes through with Harry's requests. And, yeah, the rest, of course, is, how the rest of the film plays out.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, of course, that she had to do that. But at the same time, I think the point was that Harry was watching from a distance to make sure that she actually did it. And even if he couldn't hear her, I'm sure if they tried to make a move, he'd know about it, and then, bad things would just really start to happen. So it kind of makes sense that they go through with it. But at the same time, I think he comes to regret it quite a lot later.
Yeah. And when we get to the fight with Peter and Harry at his penthouse, I do like it, and I think it's pretty well shot and pretty well choreographed for the most part. And how it ends with Peter like flinging a pumpkin bomb right at Harry's face, I was just like,
Whoa.
good lord. He's going a bit too far. Then Peter notices a newspaper from the Daily Bugle of a fake photo of Spider-Man robbing a bank. And he deduces that Eddie Brock was the one who doctored the photo. provides proof for it, and Brock, of course, gets fired. And I like how, like, Brock tries to convince him not to do so because he's like, if you do this, I will lose everything. There's not a paper in town that will hire me. And he's like,
You
well, I
should
should
have
have thought of that earlier. Yeah. And after that, I like how Jameson is just like, after that, I haven't put in rotation in 20 years!
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. But thanks to that, Spider-Man got his reputation back. The Bugle pretty much fired a faker, and Peter pretty much gets his life more or less back to normal.
Yeah, and he proceeds to dance his way through the streets of New York, which is at times a little bit silly, but it's kind of like, I just don't know. I mean, with him just going yeah,
Yeah, I mean, to me, what I take from that scene personally, I mean, it is a little hilarious, but I think the reason behind it is, if you think about it, you have a suit underneath your clothes that gradually turns off inhibitions. Basically, what you feel like, whenever you feel like something bad happens, you tell yourself in your mind, stop, don't do it, it's not a good idea. But in Peter's case, because of that, you know, he's just doing everything that he wouldn't normally do. I think it's meant to represent sort of like a different side to Peter Parker that he's always kept hidden, and the symbiote basically like is just making him do the opposite. You know, release all that stuff that, and do all that stuff that he ever wanted to do but never got the chance.
Yeah, and like we mentioned before in our reviews for the first two Spider-Man films, how, like, they follow similar traits to the Christopher Reeve Superman films. Like, in Superman 3, Superman becomes evil and corrupted because of a form of kryptonite, and it's the same for Spider-Man 3, with Spider-Man being bonded with the symbiote.
Yeah.
But, I mean, but it's mostly just played for laughs, and you don't really take it very seriously, for the most part.
But it still, I think, in my opinion, kind of serves a purpose, you know. I mean, it just really kind of makes sense to me. It's a little goofy, of course. It's some maybe people don't normally talk about, but I think that there's a reason other than just for laughs. You put it in there.
Yeah, and how, like, certain things are played out in the editor's cut. I mean, there are some moments in the editor's cut that I do like, and certain, like, scenes that are added, especially, like, the black suit Spider-Man, like, swinging through the city once he leaves the Bugle.
Yeah, I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
That was in broad daylight. That's like a good way to get a real good photo of him in the new suit.
Oh, yeah, and one moment in the editor's cut that I do like, which I didn't mention, was that scene with Peter in his bed, wanting to put on the black suit, and I love Christopher Young's score in that scene, and you see the suit moving.
Yeah, like kind of like a little breathing heartbeat or something as it moves in a bit of a creepy way, like a dog that just was asleep and then
Just waiting for his master.
and then when Peter opens the suit, it's like it notices he's there, so it starts moving.
Oh, yeah.
In a really creepy kind of way.
Yeah, and I do love how, like, more Christopher Young's score was restored in that cut.
Yeah, it's nice that he got to throw in a few more like versions, so to speak, of his original score. But it's also nice that he was able to
Like, honor, like, what Danny Elfman did in the past.
Precisely. Not exactly the same as Danny Elfman, but I think it's a version of the theme that he really tried his best to honor Danny Elfman in, and I think personally he would be rather proud of him for doing
Yeah,
that.
I definitely agree with that. And when we see that Sandman is still alive, that's one scene that I always liked in the editor's cut was him, like, visiting his daughter without them realizing it, using his powers to make a huge sandcastle for her, which is a scene I think that should have been left in the theatrical cut, which I do think is a beautiful, touching moment, and it adds a little bit more to his character because, I mean, he's lost throughout most of the second act because he's supposed to be his motivation is mostly trying to save his daughter, but little screen time is really dedicated to that, and we don't really get a chance for him to, like really explore his character and, like, him trying to, like, do, like, everything he can to save his daughter. And I like how like they add this one scene in the editor's cut, and I think it's a really beautiful and touching moment.
I agree. I cannot deny for even a second, in my opinion, that that scene is like one of the most beautiful, symbolic father-daughter moments that I've ever seen in a film. I say symbolic because she didn't know it was him actually there, so, you know. But I also could kind of see, to a degree, why they would want to take it out. Only because, you see, they say that Penny's dying, so if he's like taking a few minutes, even if it's to see her, if he really wants to help her, then he should probably be out there trying to get the money that she needs to survive. And also, the ending portion of it, while extremely touching as a father daughter moment between them, the ending portion makes him seem a lot more like your typical villain because he kind of swears to her that Spider Man won't stop him again. And while I admire his compassion for his daughter enough to try to make that happen, I think I like the way he was portrayed in the theatrical cut just a bit more because it makes him seem like not as much of a criminal as it is just a man trying to atone for his actions.